In the sprawling, restless city of Boston lived a young woman named Sofia Morgan. To the early morning joggers and cafe workers she passed, she was nearly invisible, just another tired face in the pre-dawn darkness. She moved through the streets with the practiced silence of someone whose existence had become an afterthought. Her dented Honda, a 2009 silver sedan with a cracked passenger window and tires that needed replacing 3 months ago, became her address. She parked it in different lots each night, the parking garage on Atlantic Avenue on Mondays, the empty lot behind the shuttered CVS on Tuesdays, the street outside the closed laundromat on Wednesdays. Rotation. Never twice in the same place. Never anywhere long enough to become a problem. At gas station bathrooms lit by fluorescent lights that made her skin look like ash, she washed her face in cold water that came out brownish from old pipes. She combed her dark hair, shoulder length and dry from repeated washing with dollar store shampoo, and tried not to look at her reflection too long. Her eyes were hazel and hollow. 29 years old but looking like someone who had survived a decade she did not actually live through. Behind the driver's seat of her Honda, wedged into the space where the back cushion had collapsed, lived everything that remained of her life. A canvas backpack. Navy blue, fraying at the seams. Inside, 2 extra shirts, a pair of jeans, socks with holes she had darned twice, underwear, a toothbrush, a hairbrush, a bar of soap wrapped in paper, a photograph of a woman who looked like her mother, dead 7 years from an infection after childbirth complications, from a hospital bill Sofia could not pay. And the foreclosure notice. It lived in the pocket of her jacket, a brown wool coat from a thrift store, the paper worn soft from handling. She unfolded it most nights by the glow of her phone, the words blurring in her vision. The shelter. The place she had worked for free for 3 years. The place where she slept on a cot in the back room. The place where abandoned children and trafficked women and forgotten men knew her name, knew her voice, knew that when she brought them soup at midnight, it was because she had not eaten dinner either. Margaret Harrington's legal team had sent the notice. 7 days remained before the locks were changed. $125,000 in back rent and property taxes. $125,000 that did not exist in the world of someone who had $34 in her jacket pocket. 34. Everything she had left. She did not cry about it. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 5 years ago when she fled from the apartment where her mother had died, from the landlord's hands, from a city that no longer wanted her. She counted the money once, twice, 3 times, as if the number might change. It never did. $34. 7 days. 268 hours stretched out like a sentence she had not committed a crime to deserve. But on the night of the summer thunderstorm, Sofia Morgan was not counting money. The sky had cracked open at 2 in the morning, and the streets of Boston flooded with sudden violence. Rain fell like a weapon, like something meant to destroy everything it touched. Lightning split the darkness outside the checkered windows of Mel's Diner on Atlantic Avenue, and Sofia sat in a booth with a cup of black coffee she could not afford, because the waitress, a kind woman named Dorothy who had worked there for 30 years, had brought it to her without writing it on the tab. Dorothy knew. Everyone at Mel's Diner knew that Sofia was the kind of person who lived in her car, because she came in at strange hours and always ordered water, and sometimes she fell asleep in the corner booth and no one woke her until near closing. The clock on the wall showed 3 in the morning. Sofia wrapped her cold hands around the coffee cup and stared out at the rain. She thought about the children sleeping in the shelter, 12 of them tonight, ranging from 5 years old to 16, all of them carrying stories that would have broken a younger version of herself. She thought about Marcus, age 8, who drew pictures of houses he would never live in. She thought about Tanya, age 15, who had been sold 3 times before reaching the age of consent. She thought about the network that did this, that bought and sold children like commodities, like broken things with no value. Margaret Harrington's network. The foreclosure notice was their victory. The diner door opened. A small girl stumbled in, and the rain followed her like a curse. She was 7 years old, maybe 6, Sofia could not be certain because the child's face was twisted with terror and her clothes clung to her like a second skin, soaked through and shaking. Her hair was blonde, matted dark with rain and something else, something that made Sofia's stomach turn. The girl's eyes found Sofia across the empty diner, and in that moment, something broke open in Sofia's chest like a dam giving way. The child ran toward the booth and collapsed into the seat across from Sofia without speaking. Without asking. Just knowing, somehow, that this woman sitting alone in a diner at 3 in the morning was the kind of person who would not turn her away. Sofia reached across the table and took the girl's trembling hand. "What is your name?" she whispered. "Emma," the girl said. Her voice was barely audible, like the final breath of something dying. "My name is Emma. And he is coming back for me." Sofia did not ask who. She did not ask what. She simply stood and walked to the kitchen, where the overnight cook, a man named Ray who had seen his share of lost people, nodded at her without judgment. Sofia pulled a kitchen knife from the magnetic strip on the wall. It was not large. It was not particularly sharp. But it was something. She returned to the booth and sat beside Emma, not across from her, and pulled the child close against her side. The small body was shaking with a violence that went deeper than cold. Sofia placed the knife on the table in front of them, a defiant thing in the fluorescent light. Through the checkered window, rain hammered the glass in waves. The streets outside were nearly empty, just the sound of the storm and the occasional car passing with its headlights cutting through the darkness. And then, parked across the street, a black car appeared. The windows were tinted dark. Sofia could not see inside, but she felt it. The weight of being watched. The presence of something powerful and dangerous observing her from behind that glass. A man sat in the driver's seat of the black Mercedes sedan, though Sofia would never know his name, would not know it for days yet. Luca Bianchi was 36 years old, 6 foot 2 inches tall, and he carried the kind of presence that made men step aside without him having to speak. His dark hair was styled back from his face with the precision of a man who had learned that every detail mattered. His eyes were storm grey and burning with an intensity that had broken people far stronger than Sofia Morgan. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a silver line earned in a warehouse fire 15 years ago when he had carried his brother out of a burning building and his brother had repaid him by stealing the one thing Luca loved more than his own life. His daughter. Emma. For years had passed since that betrayal, for years of searching every dark corner of this city, every trafficking ring, every network of exploitation. And tonight, at 3 in the morning, in a diner he had been surveilling because Douglas Hale's men frequented it, Luca Bianchi watched a woman he did not know stand between his stolen daughter and the men who held her captive. But Sofia knew none of this. She only knew that there was a knife in her hand and a child shaking against her side and the sound of an engine cutting off across the street. The diner door opened again. 3 men in expensive suits entered, water streaming from their shoulders, their faces hard and unmarked by mercy. The first man was tall and wide, with the kind of bulk that came from working out in prison. The second was thin and sharp-featured, with a scar on his neck that went white when he moved. The third was older, maybe 40, with grey threading through his dark hair and a gold watch that caught the diner light. They did not look surprised to see the child. They looked like men who had come to collect something that belonged to them. The oldest one spoke first. His voice was like venom. "Emma. You need to come with us now." Sofia stood. The knife was still in her hand. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the rain hammered harder, and Dorothy emerged from behind the counter with her hands raised as if that might stop what was coming. "She is not going anywhere with you," Sofia said. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I am going to ask you to leave this diner, and I am asking you now. There are cameras. There are witnesses." The grey-haired man smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had never been told no by a woman with $34 and a kitchen knife. "You," he said, "have no idea who you are talking to. You have no idea what you are protecting, or why. This child is property. This child was sold to us. And you are going to step aside, or I am going to break every bone in your hand that is holding that knife." Sofia did not move. Behind the black Mercedes across the street, Luca Bianchi watched the three men confront the woman in the diner. He watched her plant her feet. He watched her refuse to surrender. And something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, something he had thought dead along with the brother who had betrayed him. She was protecting a child. A child. Standing between her and the darkness. Sofia gripped the knife tighter. "Come and try," she said, and she meant every word, and the men moved forward, and the rain fell harder, and the diner at 3 in the morning became the moment that would change everything. 2 weeks before the rain came, before the men in the black Mercedes parked outside the diner, before Sofia Morgan understood that her life was about to intersect with the most dangerous man in Boston, she woke up in the back seat of her Honda Civic with her neck bent at an angle that sent sharp pain down her spine. The clock on her phone read 5:13 a.m. The sky was still dark. The parking lot behind the shuttered factory on Boston Street was empty except for her car and the ghost of whatever had died here decades ago. She sat up slowly, feeling each vertebra protest, and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair had come loose from its braid during the night. There were sleep creases on her cheek from where her face had pressed against the window. She was 31 years old and looked 40. The fluorescent lights of gas stations and waiting rooms and hospital corridors had stolen something from her that she did not think she would ever get back. Sofia pulled her canvas backpack from behind the driver's seat. Everything she owned fit inside it. Her second pair of jeans. 3 shirts, all donated, all carefully washed by hand in gas station bathrooms. A toothbrush. A bar of soap wrapped in a plastic bag. Her mother's wedding ring, which did not fit any of her fingers and never had. She carried it anyway. A notebook filled with numbers that never added up. And in the inside pocket, folded so many times the creases had worn through the paper like knife cuts, the foreclosure notice. She drove to the Shell station on Dorchester Avenue, the same one she went to every morning, parking far enough away that Rashid at the counter would not think she was begging. The bathroom smelled like someone had poured an entire bottle of industrial cleaner on the tile, and the mirror was scratched so badly she could barely see her own face. But the water was hot, and that was mercy. Sofia washed her hands, her face, her neck. She wet her hair and twisted it back into a braid while water dripped down her arms. The fluorescent lights made her skin look like ash. She looked at herself and did not recognize the woman staring back. When she unfolded the foreclosure notice under the harsh light, the words blurred the way they always did, even though she had read them 40, maybe 50 times. Final notice of foreclosure proceeding. The notice was dated 3 weeks ago. The amount due was $125,000. The property was the shelter on Vine Street where Sofia had worked for 5 years, first as a volunteer, then in the evenings after her other jobs ended, and for the last 2 years, as someone who slept on a cot in the back room because she had nowhere else to go. The date of seizure was exactly 7 days away. 7 days to find $125,000. 7 days to keep that building, and the children in it, and the life she had built out of nothing. She folded the paper again and put it back in her jacket pocket. The drive to the shelter took 18 minutes. Sofia parked her dented Honda on Vine Street and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel, breathing. The building was 3 stories of old red brick, windows covered with drawings that children had made. Paper chains and snowflakes and a painting of the ocean that could not possibly exist in inland Boston, but the little girl who had drawn it insisted that she could see it if she looked hard enough. That was 6 months ago. The little girl, Maria, had been adopted by a couple from Newton. Sofia had watched her leave and had not cried, because she had learned that if she cried, she could not function, and if she could not function, the other children suffered. She pushed open the heavy door and was hit immediately by the smell of institutional cooking. Oatmeal and artificial vanilla and the faint chemical smell of the laundry detergent they used on the children's clothes. Mrs. Chen was in the kitchen, stirring a massive pot of eggs. She looked up when Sofia came in and did not say anything about her hair still being wet from the gas station bathroom, or about the fact that Sofia had been parking behind the factory for 2 weeks because she could not afford a room anywhere else. "Morning, Sofia," Mrs. Chen said. Emma didn't eat breakfast. She hasn't eaten much all week. Maybe you could sit with her. Emma was 7 years old. She had arrived at the shelter 10 days ago, brought by a social worker who had said only that her previous living situation was no longer viable. Emma did not talk. She had thin dark hair and eyes that looked through people rather than at them, as if she was seeing something that no one else could see. She sat by the window every morning and stared out at the street, and no amount of kindness or crackers or gentle words had moved her to respond. Sofia found her in the reading room, the same window, the same position. She sat down beside Emma without saying anything. Sometimes the best way to talk to someone was not to talk at all. She opened her backpack and pulled out 2 saltine crackers. Not because she could afford to give them away, but because the crackers cost 5 cents and Emma had not eaten. Emma took 1 cracker and held it without eating it. "Your hands are very small," Sofia said quietly. "My mother had small hands too. I do not remember many things about her, but I remember her hands. They were gentle." Emma bit the corner of the cracker. "She disappeared when I was 8, Sofia continued. One day she was there, and the next day she was not. Nobody ever told me where she went. They just told me that I needed to learn to be invisible, because invisible people do not disappear. Invisible people are forgotten, and forgotten people are left alone, and alone is safe." She did not know why she was telling Emma this. She had never told anyone about her mother. But Emma was staring out the window, and the rain was beginning to fall, and something in the child's silence made Sofia feel that maybe invisible people recognized each other. "It is not true," Sofia said. "Being invisible does not keep you safe. But I did not know that when I was 8. I spent a long time learning how to disappear." Emma set down the cracker and reached over and took Sofia's hand. She did not speak, but her grip was tight, and her palm was warm, and that was enough. At noon, Margaret Harrington arrived with a clipboard and a woman in a grey suit who was taking photographs. Margaret was tall and very thin, with hair that had been colored a shade of blonde that did not exist in nature. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Sofia made in a month. She walked through the shelter the way a general walks across a conquered battlefield, barely looking at the children playing on the floor, barely acknowledging Mrs. Chen's greeting. "The building is charming," Margaret said to the woman in the grey suit, her voice sharp and bright like broken glass. "But the property value would be significantly higher if it were converted to a boutique hotel or high-end mixed-use development. The city has been very clear about their priorities. Residential centers do not fit the neighborhood's trajectory." She walked past the reading room where Sofia and Emma were still sitting. She did not even glance in. "These people need to learn self-sufficiency," Margaret continued. "Hand them money, hand them shelter, and they forget that they are supposed to be helping themselves. I am actually doing them a favor by closing this place. It will force them to take responsibility. They have a week to find other arrangements." Sofia felt Emma's hand grip her fingers tighter. She did not move. She did not speak. She just sat there, listening to the woman who had decided to destroy everything she had built talk about responsibility to someone who probably believed her. That evening, Sofia worked her shift at the diner on Atlantic Avenue. She poured coffee for construction workers and taxi drivers and the occasional businessman who had missed his last train out of the city. She made $13.47 in tips, and she left it all on the table of the last customer who sat at the counter because he had been kind to her, and kindness was rare enough that it deserved to be paid forward even when you could not afford it. Dorothy, the owner, slipped a sandwich into a bag when Sofia was not looking. Day-old turkey and tomato. She set it on the counter near Sofia's station. "For your pockets," Dorothy said when Sofia tried to refuse. "You have that look in your eyes. The look that says you are doing math in your head and the numbers are not coming out the way you want them to." Sofia did not argue. She had learned not to refuse small mercies. In her car that night, parked on a side street in Dorchester, Sofia unfolded her notebook and tried to do the math again. She had $34. She made approximately $97 a day across her 2 jobs. 7 days meant roughly $679. She needed $125,000. That meant she would need to work for 184 years without spending a single penny on food, rent, medicine, or transportation. The numbers had not changed since yesterday. They would not change tomorrow. She wrote them down anyway. 16, 17, 18 years of calculations, and she still could not make them work. She pulled out the crumpled foreclosure notice and read the words one more time, as if the meaning might have shifted, might have become something other than final. Across the street, through the darkness, the lights of the diner glowed like a beacon. Through the window, she could see Emma staring out at the rain, her small face illuminated by the streetlight, her expression the same as it had been all week. Waiting for something. Or maybe just waiting. What Sofia did not know, what she could not have imagined as she sat in her Honda with $34 and 7 days before her world ended, was that Emma had been missing for 4 years. Emma had been stolen, sold, traded between men who moved through Boston's underworld like sharks through blood in the water. And the most ruthless man in that underworld, a man named Luca Bianchi, had been searching for his daughter every single day since the moment she was taken. He was getting closer. The summer sky split open at 11 o'clock at night. Rain came down like a punishment, heavy and cold, turning Boston streets into rivers of black water that reflected the neon signs above them. Sofia Morgan sat in the back room of the riverside shelter, listening to the storm rage against the windows, and wondered if the universe was trying to tell her something. Beside her on a narrow cot, Emma, 7 years old, trembling in clothes still damp from earlier, finally fell asleep, her small hand gripping Sofia's sweater even in unconsciousness. Sofia had not moved in 4 hours. Her legs had gone numb an hour ago, but she remained perfectly still, afraid that any shift in her weight might disturb the child. The foreclosure notice crackled in her jacket pocket with each shallow breath she took. $125,000. 7 days until Margaret Harrington's lawyers changed the locks. 7 days until these children, Tommy, age 6, sleeping in the cot across the room, Marcus, age 8, curled up on the floor by the door, little Jade, barely 5, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, had nowhere to go. Sofia had $34. She had already counted it 4 times that evening. The pounding came at midnight. 3 sharp raps against the shelter's front door, so loud they echoed through the hallway. Sofia's body went rigid. Emma's eyes snapped open, and the child released a sound like a wounded animal, a whimper so pure it fractured something in Sofia's chest. "It's okay," Sofia whispered, though the word meant nothing. She lifted Emma carefully, carried her away from the back room, toward the front entrance where the pounding continued, methodical, impatient, the knock of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Through the reinforced window, Sofia saw 3 men in dark suits standing in the rain, water streaming down their faces. The one in front was late 40s, his hair slicked back, his watch catching the streetlight with the kind of shine that belonged to real money. His smile was the worst part. It had no warmth behind it, just the shape of a smile, like he'd learned the configuration from watching other people do it. "Is there a child here named Emma?" he called through the door. "I'm Douglas Hale. I'm her uncle. I have custody papers." Sofia's entire body screamed wrong. The word echoed in her sternum like a bell struck underwater. She looked down at Emma, whose fingernails were digging small crescents into her neck. "I want to verify that with the police first," Sofia said through the door. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "If you come back with an officer, we can." "I'll be back," Hale said, and his smile widened. "With the papers. And with the right persuasion." He turned, water spraying from his expensive coat, and walked back into the rain. His men followed. The car doors opened. An engine started. They were gone. But Emma did not stop shaking. Sofia carried her to the kitchen, made hot chocolate with milk she could not afford to waste, and listened as Emma spoke for the first time in weeks about what had happened to her before, a long time ago, Emma said, though her sense of time was fractured, unreliable. Different names. Dark rooms. Men who smelled like cigarettes and cologne and something else, something that Emma could not name but whose memory lived in her body like a scar. "They will come back," Emma whispered. They always come back. Sofia made a decision at 1 in the morning. She packed her canvas backpack with everything she owned, 2 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, a notebook where she kept her numbers, the foreclosure notice, a hairbrush, a phone charger that no longer worked. She left notes for the day staff. She took Emma's hand, and they slipped out through the kitchen door into the summer storm that was still raging, that seemed to have no intention of stopping. The rain plastered Sofia's hair against her face as they ran through flooded streets. Emma was light enough that Sofia could carry her, and she did, one arm supporting the child's legs, the other holding their single backpack. Her shoes filled with water. Her breath came in sharp, panic bursts. Behind them, she could hear nothing but the storm, but her body was certain they were being followed anyway. The diner on Atlantic Avenue was the only place open. Its windows glowed like a sanctuary, the checkered floor visible through rain-streaked glass. Sofia pushed through the door and collapsed into a back booth, both of them soaking, both of them trembling. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and tired shoulders, brought them towels without being asked. Sofia ordered hot chocolate for Emma with $5 of her $34, sat across from the girl, and waited. At 2 in the morning, Emma spoke. "Those men took me before," she said, her voice barely audible beneath the sound of rain battering the diner's walls. "A long time ago. I had a different name then. I do not remember it anymore. But I remember their hands. I remember the car. I remember being afraid that nobody would ever find me." Sofia's blood turned to ice. She reached across the table and took Emma's small hand in her own scarred, calloused one. "I will not let them take you again," Sofia said. "I swear it on everything I have." What she meant was, "I swear it on my nothing. I swear it on my $34 and my falling apart car and the fact that I have nowhere to go either. But I will use my body as a shield. I will use my hands as weapons. I will die before I let anyone take this child." At 3 in the morning, the diner door opened and 3 men entered, shaking rain from expensive coats. Douglas Hale led them, his smile wet and predatory. The older waitress moved toward him instinctively, but he shoved her aside without looking, without slowing. She stumbled backward, caught herself against the counter. The other patrons, 2 truckers in a corner booth, a man with tired eyes reading a newspaper alone, simply froze, understanding without being told that the rules had changed. Sofia stood. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was level when she spoke. "No." Hale laughed. He actually laughed. The sound was like breaking glass. "No? Nobody, in your wet clothes and your poverty, are telling me no." Sofia moved toward the counter, toward the kitchen beyond it. Her fingers closed around the handle of a chef's knife, 8 inches of metal with weight and purpose. She turned back, the blade catching the diner's harsh fluorescent light. "I am telling you no," Sofia said. Emma moved behind her, both small hands gripping Sofia's sweater. Sofia could feel the child's racing heartbeat against her spine. Outside, across the street, parked in a black Mercedes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, Luca Bianchi sat watching through rain-streaked glass. He had been following Douglas Hale for weeks, tracking his supply lines, his customers, his operation. The trafficking network that moved young girls through Boston's darker neighborhoods like merchandise, like inventory, like nothing. For years ago, his brother Marco had sold his own niece to this man. For years ago, Luca had made a choice between mercy and survival, and that choice had cost him the person he loved most in the world. Emma had been taken when she was 3 years old. For years of every photograph of a missing child possibly being her. For years of his men coming through doors, opening closets, checking basements, every single time thinking this might be the moment. Luca had seen 100 girls who were not his daughter. But as he sat in that black Mercedes, rain streaming down the windows, he saw a child's face turn toward the light coming from the diner, and recognition hit him like a bullet fired at close range. That face. Those eyes. The specific set of her jaw. That was his daughter. That was Emma. And the homeless woman with the knife, the one standing between his child and three armed men with nothing but $34 in her pocket and a fierce, shaking refusal to surrender, was about to change everything. Luca opened the car door and stepped into the rain. He moved without hurrying, his expensive black coat moving around him like water, like darkness taking physical form. Water streamed from his hair, which was dark brown with silver at the temples. A scar ran along his jawline, thin and precise, the kind of mark that came from violence survived and accepted as the cost of staying alive in a world where mercy was a luxury no one could afford. The diner door opened, and the room held its breath. Even Douglas Hale froze. Even his men stepped back. Because they recognized, in the way that predators recognize apex predators, that something far more dangerous than themselves had just entered the space. Luca's eyes found Hale and held him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Quiet in the way that a blade is quiet before it cuts through air. "Douglas, you are in my city. Uninvited." Hale tried to straighten, tried to muster bravado. "I have arrangements with Margaret Harrington. I have protection. This girl is—" Luca did not let him finish. He turned away from Hale entirely, dismissing him the way you might dismiss smoke, and looked at Emma. His face changed. Something cracked in that controlled expression, a fissure in stone where feeling leaked through. "Emma," he said. Just her name. But his voice broke on it. Emma stared at him, uncertain, confused, her small body rigid against Sofia's back. Then something flickered in her eyes, memory, instinct, the deep cellular recognition of blood. "Papa," she whispered, the word uncertain, a question. Sofia's mind reeled. This man who radiated danger like heat from a furnace. This man whose very presence had made every criminal in the diner understand they were in the presence of a power that exceeded their own. This was Emma's father. Luca's men entered without a sound. Carlo first, broad-shouldered and scarred, his hand resting casually near his coat. Nino followed, younger, his eyes cataloguing exits and threats with the precision of someone trained for violence. They moved into position without needing to be told, and Douglas Hale's men seemed to shrink, to fold inward, understanding in the way that prey understands the presence of a predator that they were about to be removed from this space. It happened in 30 seconds. No shots fired. No raised voices. Just a shifting of weight, a meaningful look, and Hale and his men found themselves being guided toward the door with the kind of courtesy that felt like a threat. They were gone into the rain, and the Mercedes that sat outside was theirs no longer. Now it was just Luca, Sofia, Emma, and the older waitress who had the good sense to retreat into the kitchen and stay there. Luca knelt in front of Emma, bringing himself down to her eye level. When he spoke, Sofia heard something in his voice she had not expected to hear from someone who looked like he did. Tenderness. Desperation. The sound of a man learning to breathe. "I have been looking for you for 4 years, Luca said. Every day. Every night. I never stopped. Not once." Emma started crying, and this man who seemed carved from darkness reached out with hands that were shaking, and gathered her carefully, like she was made of glass, like she was the most fragile and precious thing he had ever held. Sofia lowered the knife. And everything she had believed about how the world worked, about justice, about fairness, about whether miracles were possible for people like her, began to shift, like the tectonic plates beneath the earth, silently and irrevocably. The rain continued outside, but inside the diner, something had fundamentally changed. Sofia stood holding an empty knife and watching a man she did not know hold a child she had promised to protect, and she felt the ground beneath her feet give way entirely. 2 days passed in a blur of false hope and crumbling certainty. Sofia had let herself believe, just for a moment, that the worst was over. That a man with black cars and steady eyes had rewritten her story. She was wrong. The morning Margaret Harrington arrived at the shelter, the sky was the color of old bruises. 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb at 7:22 a.m., and Margaret emerged like a dark bird, her tailored coat the shade of ash, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Behind her came 2 police officers, a social worker with a clipboard, and a van full of news cameras. The rain had stopped, but the cold remained, that bone-deep cold that speaks of endings. Sofia was on the front steps, waiting for the children, when she saw them. Her body knew the answer before her mind did. She felt it in the way her chest tightened, the way her breath came shallow and quick. Margaret's voice carried across the wet pavement like a blade. "I'm afraid we're going to have to shut this facility down immediately. The building has failed inspection. More importantly, we've received several reports regarding the safety practices here. A homeless woman, unstable, keeping company with known criminals, has been allowed around vulnerable children." She turned to the cameras, her expression a mask of concern that looked practiced in a mirror. "These children deserve better. They deserve protection." The social worker, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes that said she had seen this movie too many times, began moving toward the door. Sofia stepped in front of her. "Those children are safe here," Sofia said. Her voice was barely steady. "I have kept them safe." "You have kept them exposed," Margaret replied. Her eyes moved over Sofia like she was examining something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "The offer I made you was generous. A quiet exit. A chance to disappear. You should have taken it." Behind Margaret, the cameras clicked and whirred. Sofia caught snippets of what they were capturing: desperate woman, shelter closing, children being removed. By tonight, this would be a story. By tomorrow, she would be the villain in her own life. The children came down the stairs slowly, confused, clutching the social worker's hands. Emma was not among them. Emma had been taken 3 hours earlier by a different social worker, pending evaluation, while Luca's lawyers fought through a legal system that moved like molasses. The foreclosure notice was no longer just a piece of paper in Sofia's pocket. It had become prophecy. That night, Sofia sat in her Honda in a parking lot at the edge of Boston, rain drumming against the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. The city lights reflected off the wet asphalt, amber and merciless. Her canvas backpack lay on the passenger seat, everything she owned crammed inside. $34 remained in her jacket pocket. $34, and she had nothing else. No job, because the shelter had been her employment. No address, because the shelter had been her home. No children, because they had been removed into the machinery of the state, and she was just an invisible woman who had somehow become visible enough to destroy. She turned the key. The engine groaned to life. Through the windshield, she could see the highway entrance 3 blocks south. I-95, heading out of Massachusetts. She could be in New York by dawn. In Philadelphia by noon. She could become the ghost she had almost perfected the art of being. Disappear into the spaces between cities, the way her mother had disappeared all those years ago. Maybe that was all she was built for. To vanish. Her hand moved toward the gear shift. Then she saw it. Tucked beneath the sun visor, held in place by the crease where it had been folded and refolded, Emma's drawing. Done yesterday, in colored pencil, with a child's certainty about what love looked like. 2 stick figures, one tall and one small, holding hands under a yellow sun. Emma's writing underneath, each letter formed with the concentration of someone just learning, Sofia and me. Sofia turned off the engine. She sat there in the darkness for a long time. Then she opened the door, stepped out into the rain, and walked back toward the shelter. Back toward a locked building that was no longer hers to enter. Back toward the place where everything she cared about had just been taken. She was standing there, soaking wet, when the black Mercedes pulled up beside her. Luca emerged from the back seat like he had been waiting for this exact moment. His coat was dark cashmere, worth more than Sofia's entire life had been before. His face was still, but his eyes held something that looked like a storm trying to break through clouds. He walked toward her without hesitation. "I thought I had lost both of you," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a tremor underneath it like an earthquake in a distant place. Sofia broke then. The tears came from somewhere deeper than sadness, some cavern of her body that had been sealed since childhood. She told him everything. The shelter closing. The children being taken. Emma in evaluation, as if she were a defective object that needed assessment. The way Margaret's smile had looked, satisfied and cruel. The moment she had almost driven away and become invisible again, the way she was best at being. "I was going to run," she whispered. "I was going to leave her here alone." "You were going to survive," Luca said. "That is what you have always done. That is what your body learned when you were 8 years old and your mother did not come home." He took a step closer. "But Sofia, you are not 8 anymore. And you are not alone." He pulled out his phone and made a single call. "It is time," he said. "Nothing else." He listened for 5 seconds, then ended the call. Within an hour, the city changed. 12 men in black suits moved through Boston's warehouse district like a coordinated silence. They entered Hale's operation at 11:43 p.m., and the sound of the doors opening was the last thing anyone inside heard before they heard only footsteps, commands delivered in low voices, and the metallic click of handcuffs. The evidence was immaculate. 23 women and girls in the back rooms, along with documents so detailed they read like a ledger of human suffering. Financial records connecting Douglas Hale to Margaret Harrington. Messages discussing pricing. Photographs. Everything that could fit in a warehouse, Luca's men gathered with the precision of people who understood that documentation was the deadlier weapon than any gun. Hale himself was found in his office, attempting to burn files in a steel sink. He tried to run when he saw them. He made it 3 steps. They brought him down the stairs at 12:14 a.m., his expensive suit torn, his left eye beginning to swell, his breath coming in gasps. Luca was waiting in the warehouse, standing beside a photograph of Emma, 4 years old, the day she had been taken. Luca looked at Hale the way a judge looks at a sentence that has already been written. "You took my daughter," Luca said. "You sold children. You fed them into a machine designed by people like Margaret Harrington who profit from their suffering." He paused. "I could kill you right now. It would be easy. It would be just." Hale's whole body began to shake. He fell to his knees, his composed mask shattering like glass. "Please," he whispered. "Please, I have money. I have information. I can." "You can spend 40 years in federal prison," Luca said. "That is what you can do. At dawn, the FBI receives everything. Your operation. Your connections. Every name. Every transaction. You will spend the rest of your natural life in a cage, understanding, every single day, what you have done." The FBI raid happened at 6:08 a.m., coordinated, professional, overwhelming. They took Hale in a black vehicle with no windows, and he did not stop screaming until the vehicle turned a corner and his voice disappeared into the Boston morning. Margaret Harrington's destruction was more deliberate. She was holding a press conference at 9:36 a.m., announcing the permanent closure of the shelter to the assembled media, her voice pitched perfectly between sadness and necessity, when the federal agents walked in through the doors at her back. Her face went white. Her mouth opened. No words came out. "Margaret Harrington," the lead agent said, reading from a card, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, racketeering, money laundering, and knowingly endangering minors." They handcuffed her on live television. Her lawyer, sitting in the front row, stood up slowly, understanding in that moment that his client was not a woman to be saved but a liability to be distanced from. The cameras captured everything, the shock, the moment her power evaporated, the exact second she became visible as what she had always been, a predator wearing expensive clothes. Within hours, her assets were frozen. Her properties seized. The shelter, ironically, was being transferred to Luca's lawyers, to be rebuilt. By evening, her name was on every news station in New England. By the next morning, her face was on the front page of the Boston Globe, captioned as the mastermind of a trafficking operation that had destroyed hundreds of lives. Carlo delivered the final message to Margaret in her holding cell, where she sat in an orange jumpsuit, her hair coming out of its careful styling, her mind still struggling to understand how the world had inverted so completely. "Too quick, too easy, too merciful would have been the bullet," Carlo said, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. Instead, you get to live. You get to spend your natural life understanding what you are. That is the mercy Luca grants you. Do not expect more. The cell door closed with a sound like the lid of a coffin. Outside, in the Boston rain, Sofia stood holding Emma's hand. Emma had been released, reunited, no longer a case file but a child again. Sofia's fingers interlocked with her small ones, and she felt, for the first time in her adult life, like she was not holding on for survival but holding on because this was love, and love was worth holding for. The rain continued to fall, but it was different now. Not a threat. Just weather. Just the sky clearing itself, preparing for whatever came next. 1 week later, the rain had stopped, but the Boston street still glistened with the memory of it. The shelter stood on Atlantic Avenue exactly where it had always stood, but everything about it had changed. The broken windows were fixed now, glass catching morning light instead of allowing it to escape. The boarded-up kitchen had been renovated, new refrigerators humming with real food, a commercial stove that didn't require coaxing, shelves stocked with provisions that wouldn't run out in 3 days. Sofia stood in that kitchen at dawn, holding a ceramic mug that cost more than she used to spend on coffee in a month. The mug was warm. The coffee was real. These small details still shocked her system. The federal government had released the shelter from Margaret Harrington's frozen assets within 72 hours once the full scope of her operation came to light. The papers had been signed by a woman in a government office who looked at Sofia with something between pity and awe, understanding immediately that this young woman had survived something most people could not comprehend. Luca's foundation, established 6 months ago, he had told Sofia, though she never knew the exact genesis, had made an offer to purchase the building and establish permanent funding. $65,000 a year. An apartment in the renovated upper floors. A position as executive director with authority over every decision. Sofia had signed the papers with a hand that trembled, wondering if this was real, if she was real, if any of this existed outside the fever dream of the past 10 days. The first children had returned that afternoon. Not all of them, not yet. The system moved slowly even when motivated by scandal and federal oversight. But 12 had come back, old residents who remembered Sofia's voice in the dark, who knew that she had protected them once and would protect them again. They moved through the hallways like they were testing the walls to ensure they were solid, that this wasn't another temporary shelter that would betray them. Sofia watched a 9-year-old named Marcus, who had lived in the back bedroom for 8 months before the closure, run his fingers along the kitchen counter. His eyes glistened with something that looked like joy, though joy was not a feeling he had learned young enough to trust easily. Emma had been released into Luca's custody with Sofia designated as approved guardian during the transition period. The paperwork had taken exactly 4 hours and 37 minutes. Sofia had counted every second, terrified that something would reverse, that Margaret's lawyers would produce some clause that would steal the child away again. But Luca's lawyers were better than Margaret's lawyers. Luca's lawyers were better than everyone else's lawyers. At 4:37, a woman in a grey suit handed Sofia a folder, and Emma became legally, documented in triplicate, not completely safe. No child was ever completely safe, but safer. Protected. Known. The evening the paperwork was finished, Sofia, Luca, and Emma sat in the renovated shelter kitchen. Emma was asleep upstairs in a bed with new sheets and a nightlight shaped like a star that she had chosen herself from a store, a choice that would have been impossible a week earlier. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, a sound that felt like the world working the way it was supposed to work. Luca sat across from Sofia at a small wooden table, drinking coffee from a matching mug. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of all the things that couldn't be said because they both knew them already. "I don't know how to be in someone's life," Sofia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been alone since I was 8. That's 22 years of alone. I don't have the language for this." Luca set his coffee down slowly. His hands were large, scarred in ways that told their own stories of violence and survival. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 38 years of learning that trust was a vulnerability. "I've built my entire existence on control and power. On knowing everything about everyone around me so that I could never be caught unprepared. You're the first person in 20 years I've trusted without leverage. That means I have nothing protecting me from you if you decide to leave. It terrifies me constantly. Sofia reached across the table, not to touch him, she still had to work toward that kind of contact, but to place her hand near his, in the space between them. I won't leave. You might. If I did, it would kill something in me. I'm too tired to carry that kind of damage. Luca moved his hand to touch hers, and the contact was simple, ordinary, the kind of thing people in normal lives experienced without recognizing as miraculous. Then we're both trapped here with each other. That's acceptable. Sofia moved into the shelter's apartment 3 days later. She unpacked her canvas backpack for the first time in 6 months, removing items so worn from carrying that they seemed barely recognizable as belongings. A toothbrush with bristles bent from pressure. 2 pairs of underwear so thin they were nearly transparent. A sweater she had owned since she was 17, now shrunken from repeated washing. She arranged these things in drawers made of real wood, hung them in a closet that had sufficient light to see them, and then she did something she had not expected to do. She took the foreclosure notice, the paper that had lived in her jacket pocket, worn soft from handling, its words blurring in her vision each time she had unfolded it by the glow of her phone, and she taped it to her bathroom mirror. When Luca saw it during one of his evening visits, he didn't ask why she had kept it. He understood immediately. Some scars were meant to be visible, a constant reminder of how close the edge always was. He kept Marco's watch in his desk drawer for the same reason. Not because he needed to know the time. Because remembering what time was purchased at what cost. Luca's men began appearing at the shelter not as a threat but as an infrastructure. Carlo and Nino, Luca's oldest lieutenants, started working with the older children, teaching self-defense in the renovated gymnasium. Not the kind of violence they knew, that was reserved for their own world, but the practical skill of knowing your body, trusting your strength, understanding that you were not powerless. The children responded to this with something between caution and hunger. To be taught to defend yourself meant someone believed you were worth defending. 3 months into the transformation, Sofia had expanded the shelter's mission. She moved through Boston's forgotten spaces, the underbridges where transient populations clustered, the park bathrooms where children slept standing up, the back alleys where people made invisible lives out of necessity. She found them because she had been them. She spoke to them not with the voice of charity but with the voice of someone who understood that you don't dream of rescue, you dream of survival, and the two are rarely the same thing. Nino had made a comment one afternoon while watching Sofia interact with a 12-year-old girl who wouldn't speak, a child who reminded Sofia of herself at that same age. You got your daughter back, he said to Luca, meaning Emma. And found something else you didn't know you needed. Luca didn't deny it. Denial would have been dishonest, and he had made a commitment to Sofia that dishonesty between them would end the fragile thing they were building. I thought I wanted her returned to me. But what I actually needed was to understand why she was taken. Sofia's answer to that question is different than mine. She understands the predators from the inside. I understand them from the outside. Together, those two understandings might actually protect her next time. There won't be a next time, Nino said. There will always be a next time. But the timing of it, the precision of our response, that changes everything. 6 months after the shelter's reopening, Sofia stood in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, the same hour when her entire existence had pivoted. 23 children were in residence now, sleeping in beds with clean sheets, fed regularly enough that their ribs no longer showed like geography. Across Boston, Sofia's outreach program had placed 42 additional children in stable housing, found them foster families or group homes or transitional programs. One 15-year-old who had been sleeping in a parking garage was now in sophomore year at Boston Latin, the best public school in the city. A young mother with a toddler was living in an apartment with real plumbing, working toward her GED, her daughter in daycare during the day, both of them sleeping through the night without fear. Emma sat beside Sofia in a booth at the same diner where everything had started, the one with checkered floors and dying neon lights. Luca sat across from them. It was 3 in the morning because Emma had had a nightmare, a small echo of the 4 years she couldn't remember clearly, and none of them could sleep after that. The older waitress, the one who had served them coffee the night of the attack, recognized them immediately. She brought pancakes without being asked, extra whipped cream for Emma, coffee that was better than it should have been at 3 in the morning. Emma fell asleep against Sofia's shoulder, her small body relaxed in a way that indicated she trusted the surface beneath her, trusted that she would still be there when she woke. Luca and Sofia talked quietly, the kind of conversation two people have when they are building something that will outlast their own lives. "There's a new girl at the shelter," Sofia said. 12. Won't speak. Been evaluated for selective mutism, but I don't think that's it. I think she's making a choice. Silence feels safer than sound. She reminds me of who I was. Luca listened, didn't interrupt. What will you do? Be present. Not speak unless necessary. Let her understand that I survived without words, so she can survive with them deferred. Eventually, she'll talk. Not because we force her, but because she'll understand that someone already knows what the silence is saying. Luca reached across the table and took Sofia's hand. His grip was strong, capable, the hand of someone who had built an empire through will and ruthlessness. But the way he held her hand was gentle. I have a lead on another operation. 3 counties north. Women and children. Similar structure to what Harrington was running, but the male operator, Douglas Hale's former partner, is more careful about exposure. I was planning the approach alone, but I wanted to ask your opinion. The best way to help them after we bring it down. Because bringing it down is non-negotiable, but what happens after is what actually matters. They were partners in an unconventional war. His power and her understanding combined to protect the invisible ones. It wasn't the kind of partnership that appeared in romance novels or wedding announcements. It was darker, more complex, built on shared trauma and the absolute knowledge that they had both lived in worlds where the rules didn't apply to people like them. But it was real. It had held through the first months when trust seemed impossible. It would hold through whatever came next. The sunrise over Boston came slowly that morning, pushing through clouds that had held rain for so long people had forgotten what dry looked like. Sofia stood on the shelter's roof with her coffee, watching the city wake up. Luca joined her, Emma between them holding both their hands. The child's grip was small but certain, the kind of certainty only someone who has already lost everything can achieve. Sofia's canvas backpack sat inside now, empty but not discarded. She hadn't thrown it away because it was a reminder that she had survived with nothing once. Which meant she could survive anything. After the rain, the sky clears, Sofia said quietly, speaking a truth that had taken her 22 years to understand. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.